Welcome to the What You Missed podcast, where we talk, debate, and sometimes even argue, but overall let you know what you missed. Thank you so much for joining us on our third episode. My name is Andrew, and I'm here with my co-host, Anson. Today is a mini episode about all the crazy things that happened in college football last week.
Yeah, a lot of things happened last week in college football. It was a very big week of a lot of upsets, a lot of ranked teams lost, and there's going to be a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we definitely just saw the need for another podcast, and just to address all the crazy stuff that happened last week. So let's jump right into it.
All right, first thing we're going to go do is just go through the top 12 teams, sort of like we did last week. And we're just going to start it off. It did not change. Number one is Oregon. They are 11-0. They had a bye week, so nothing really changed for them.
Yeah, definitely. Excited to see what Oregon can do in the playoffs, but with that bye week, I think they just stood as number one. Ohio State didn't prove that they should be number one, and especially with that undefeated team of Oregon, I don't think they're going to be surpassed.
I agree with that.
Number two is Ohio State. They really came out and just showed what they could do against Indiana. I didn't expect that big of a blowout, but it was exciting to see their offense and their defense just really play and just really show us what they could do.
Yeah, I agree. Ohio State looked really, really great versus Indiana. 10-1, their only loss coming to Oregon, like we said a few weeks ago, but we also said they probably shouldn't have lost that game. Will Howard sort of just messed up in that game, but really, moving on from that, they've done a really good job. Number three is Texas, who are 10-1, and they played Kentucky, and they pretty obviously won 21-14, but they looked really good, and Kentucky's put up some really good fights this year, especially versus Georgia and Ole Miss. So I think this is a really good win for Texas.
Yeah, I think they just showed what they could do. Like you said, they've put up really good fights, and so they just didn't let them get anywhere close to what they've done against other teams. Number four is Penn State. They looked all right last week. Again, Penn State really hasn't shown too much to me that they're a dominant team, that they're a team that they can go out there and win by big margins, big numbers. I think they are somewhat of a contender, but I'm excited to see what they can do in the playoffs because today's game isn't a great game either.
Yeah, I agree with that. They played Minnesota and only won 26-25. And there was actually 5 field goals scored in that game, 3 by Minnesota and 2 by Penn State, and 5 TDs, 3 by Penn State and 2 by Minnesota.
Yeah.
And I think that was crazy, just seeing that there's as many field goals as there was touchdowns. And honestly, the defense did a pretty good job. I think Minnesota did a really good job, and they really showed what they can do. And they have a winning record, too. So it was actually a surprising game, and I think Penn State underestimated what Minnesota could do.
Yeah, and I honestly thought Minnesota might win that game, just seeing their offense just explode, especially in that second quarter. Their offense was just really good. And so just seeing what I saw out of Minnesota's offense, I think that Penn State defense did a pretty good job just defending against that Minnesota team, but I wish their offense would have shown more.
Yeah, I agree with that. Minnesota also had a blocked pat attempt, and they took that to the house for a few points. Number 5 is Notre Dame, who are 10-1, and they played a ranked Army team in the Bronx, and I think that was a lot of fun to watch. I know I watched some of that game. Just being able to see them play in a baseball stadium was really cool, but they didn't really have to worry about that game. That game ended 49-14 with their win.
Yeah, I agree, and we touched on it in our last episode. Just the fact that these different sports teams are just collabing to create these sort of fun atmospheres where you have one sport and another sports stadium, and that's just cool to see, and just really interactive with the just the different fan and the fan base. It was really cool to see Notre Dame beat an Army team that were ranked. Are they still ranked?
They are not ranked anymore.
They're not ranked anymore. At the time, Army was ranked, and just so seeing them face that team and just absolutely blow them out of the water, we just saw really what their offense could do.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yes, Army is not ranked anymore. They did fall from the rankings, one of the few teams that did. And, like I said, they're just not ranked anymore.
Yeah. Number 6, we have Miami. Really went out there. Like, I thought it would be a closer game. They definitely put up more points than I thought their offense would.
That.
Cam Ward did a really good job.
Always.
And so, always. And so I think their offense just shown they had some pretty good defense in that game as well. I thought it'd be closer, but they did do a good job of just winning out that game.
Yeah. Number 7 is Georgia, and they're 9-2, and they played UMass, and I think it's pretty obvious that they won. But they do play tonight. They have a Friday game at 7:30 versus their rivals Georgia Tech.
Yeah. We have number 8, Tennessee. They really played UTEP and really shut them out. And so their defense was lights out. Their offense was pretty good. They put up some good numbers, and just was impressed by Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee did a really good job. Another shutout performance from the defense. Their defense has been really strong.
Yeah.
Number 9 is SMU, and they won, and that means that they are in the ACC title game, which is really big for them, which means that they have a chance to get a first-round bye. depending on the Clemson and Miami, depending on how those games go this week, Clemson playing South Carolina, Miami playing Syracuse. If Miami loses and Clemson wins, Clemson's in. If Clemson loses or Miami wins, they're in. So Miami has a better chance of getting than Clemson, but I do think SMU will be able to put up a good fight there. They played Virginia, won 33-7, nothing to worry about there.
Yeah. Number 10, we have Indiana. Tough loss to Ohio State. They looked bad. They really didn't look like a great team.
Only scored 15 points to Ohio State's 38.
Yeah. And so, I mean, their offense was all right.
Right.
But I expected more. The Ohio State defense really just able to slow them down and not let them score as many points as I thought they would. And then the Indiana defense wasn't as strong as I usually see it at all. And so, yeah, just really letting up those points to Ohio State. I think they will be able to bounce back and definitely win this game today. But I want to see more of Indiana, especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with that. Boise State is number 11, and they are 10-1. They played Wyoming, but they should have really won this game, and they really struggled. They only won 17-13. That's only 4 points. I mean, a touchdown could have really decided this game. It could have put Boise State back to 10-2. It could have made them look really bad and not given them a thing, but they did win, and that's really all that matters.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I would have expected more of a spread and more of a margin, but yeah, Boise State I don't think came out there with their all.
No, they did not.
I don't think they just really expected Wyoming to do as well as they did. And
I definitely think, sorry, finish.
Yeah, and so I think they underestimated them, which is easy to do, especially when going against a team like Wyoming, but I think they really just need to step up their game and make sure their offense is doing really good and make sure their defense knows what to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I apologize for interrupting, but really, I think this has been the thing with every single. We've seen it in the past, but we've seen it more and more this year. People are underestimating teams and then almost losing to those teams. They're not all the way losing because they realize that they got to lock in like the fourth quarter, because that's when all these teams actually decide to lock in these days. But like really, I think we've been able to see this through all the teams this year.
Yeah.
And that people are underestimating other teams. They think, oh, we're way better than this team. We can beat this team. We see it with Notre Dame and Northern Illinois. They lost that game, and that did not make them look good. I mean, it really I don't know if I would have ranked them inside the top 10 at that point after losing to Northern Illinois. So I really do think people are underestimating many teams this year.
Yeah, and well, I agree with you in that I saw a stat the other day. There was I think it was 7 or 8 more upsets by this week than there was in 2023. And so I think that just shows, like you said, those teams just saying, oh, well, we've got this game, let's look forward, instead of saying, let's focus on this game, let's win this game, then win the next one. And so, yeah, I think I agree, and they're just underestimating those games. And rounding out the top 12, you have Clemson. Now, Clemson, like you said earlier, they're in the top 12, but there is a chance they don't make the playoffs.
Right.
Solely because that Miami team. And so, yeah, like you said, if Miami loses and Clemson wins, they're in. But if Miami wins and Clemson wins, then Miami's still in. If Miami wins and Clemson loses, then Miami's still in. So Clemson really needs to win to that beat that South Carolina team, and they really need Miami to lose. So we'll just see how that goes. I think it'll definitely be a fun game to watch, the ACC championship game, because you have SMU playing one of their teams, and we really want to see SMU prove themselves. So, yeah, just getting to watch that is going to be fun. But, yeah, just looking forward to that ACC championship game and whether Clemson will be in it or not.
Yeah, I agree with that. They do play number 15 South Carolina, and I actually think that it is better for them not to make the ACC championship.
Yeah.
I think if they could beat South Carolina, be 10-2 at the end of the season, Miami makes it to the ACC championship. Let's say Miami beats SMU.
Yeah.
And so then SMU has the same losses as Clemson. Clemson has a better record than Alabama and Ole Miss. And they're at 12, so I do think they can move up more. So I actually think they're in a really good spot. And I do think that Clemson deserves to make the playoffs. They've played Georgia, like I said. We said last week they played Georgia at the beginning of the season. They did lose that game, only scored 3 points, but still, they've looked really good after that.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's better for them actually to not get in the ACC championship, like you said, beat that South Carolina team, be 10-2, and then maybe sneak their way into that playoff spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I just mentioned Alabama being behind them with 8-3. They lost to Oklahoma, which we will touch on in a minute. But they lost 3-24. That's really bad for an Alabama team.
Yeah. No touchdowns. Really surprised me. Didn't see that coming. Yeah. And I think similarly, you see Ole Miss, not as much as a blowout, but lost their game to Florida by a touchdown. And so, yes, wow. And I just want to touch on Florida for a second. Florida has really done good. We've talked about it before, arguably the hardest schedule in all of college football. And so they've really done well with the schedule they had. A lot of teams would see that and say, oh, well, we've lost these first 3 or 4 games in the start of the season, so we're going to be a bad team.
Right.
We're just going to just give up and just sit down and just not really care and just go through the motions, right? But this Florida team has really been able to show out.
I agree with
Lots of good upsets. You have LSU and Ole Miss coming out there and beating both of those teams. That's really good. And so Ole Miss really just struggled. So did Alabama. Both teams struggled really badly offensively. And then
really defensively, too.
Yeah, defensively, especially Alabama, letting up those 24 points.
Yeah, they both let up 24 points, actually.
Yeah, and so they just neither of the defenses really looked good, and their offenses just struggled. And so that's what happens when both of those struggle, is you just get a loss to a team that maybe you shouldn't have lost to.
No, like I said, it all goes back to you're underestimating your teams. And you really don't need to underestimate anyone. I don't care if it is UMass. I'm sorry for all the UMass fans that might be listening to this. But really, I think not trying to throw SMU under the bus or anything, or UMass or anybody like that. But really, I do think that there are teams that people underestimate. And I do think SMU could be one of those teams.
Yeah.
Boise State could be one of those teams. I think people are also overestimating some teams. I think BYU is overestimated. I think BYU was getting a little bit too much credit until they lost and they actually realized for what they were. But I do think people are not on the level they should be in football right now. I think some people are higher than they should be. Some people are lower than they should be. We saw it with Indiana. Indiana was at 5, and then they absolutely got blown out by number 2 Ohio State, and it dropped them all the way to 10. And so really you just see how big of a gap people in the college football committee, the AP people, are seeing, like, okay, this guy maybe didn't deserve to be up here. Maybe we overestimate this guy. And really people are only focusing on the records. I mean, sure, they're focusing a little bit on the games they play, but right now it's really on the records, and that's what they care about. And they'll care a little bit more about it later. But really, I think it's really, really hard for a lot of teams, especially because they're like, oh, we deserve more than this. But then, every team's like that. But then you go and you see, as a fan, you watch the teams play, and you're like, they just don't deserve that. They don't, it's like Indiana doesn't deserve to be a number 5 spot. Like they don't look like a number 5 team. They haven't played anyone hard. They have like one of the easiest schedules in college football. I mean, like, so people just really aren't in their right spot, I would say, right now.
Yeah.
And that was wrapping out the first 12 teams, and the first team's out. But I would like to say number 16 is Arizona State, who are 9-2, and they are the top of the Big 12, which has pushed Clemson outside of the top 12. Arizona State, they're at 16, top of the Big 12, and then they would push Clemson out of the top 12 because they also beat BYU. Their fans stormed the field a little bit early there. It took a whole 13-plus minute delay just to get the fans to the side, and then they got to rush the field twice. Not many people get to do that in one day. But I think that was a lot of fun for Arizona State, and Arizona State is a big chance right now.
Yeah. I just want to touch one more time on Clemson, especially with that, too, knowing that you could be pushed out by Arizona State.
Right.
I think Clemson might be frazzled, and we'll touch on this later, but I think South Carolina might be able to win that game because Clemson is so frazzled. They have so many different ways that they could be pushed out of the top 12 and just into a bowl game or something like that. And so I think, there's so many ways that Clemson could just be pushed out. And so just seeing that, we'll touch on it later, but I think that could be the downfall of Clemson just because they're in that tough spot, and they're like, well, what do? We could lose to this team. We could be pushed out by here or here or here. And so, I think they might just be a little frazzled, and that might lead to a South Carolina win.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, that wraps out our top 12, and now we are going to move on to what in the upset. This is a crazy week of football, and we see 7 ranked teams lost this week.
Yeah.
That is crazy. Well, it started off just obviously Alabama lost to Oklahoma. Alabama has scored a touchdown in every single game since 2011. But then last Saturday versus Oklahoma, they only scored 3 points at the end of that streak. That is a long streak. Every single game since 2011. And you see it without Nick Saban. This team isn't what they used to be. This team still has a lot of rebuilding. You see a lot of people shifting. A lot of people aren't going to keep going to Alabama. Alabama's recruiting class is going to go down and down and down. And this is really crazy, especially to see an Oklahoma team that had a losing record, I believe, or they were 5-5. I don't exactly remember, but I do think that Alabama didn't look great.
Well, and I think the fact is, like, we talked about it, where people just need to step up, and we thought that was happening at Alabama, but they've just slowly declined. And we touched on it last week where losing a guy like Nick Saban is hard, but we need those leaders to step up. And I think, especially in that game where you saw Milroe just sitting on the bench pouting because he wasn't able to do what he was supposed to do. And so I think that's where leaders need to step up, need to say, guys, let's work to this. Let's go. Let's get back up. Let's have this energy. Because you just saw them get sad as soon as they were by a little, or as soon as Oklahoma was up by a little bit. And so I think that's just something they need to work on, is just having that mentality of we're not going to quit, we're not going to quit, we're not going to quit. Because I know Nick Saban wouldn't let them do that. Nick Saban would not let anybody sit on the bench and just pout because they're losing. He would say, get back up there, do your best. And that's all Nick Saban would ask for. And so they need that empowerment again, and they need somebody to step up and be a leader.
Yeah, there were some very calls that could have been argued both ways in that game that I would lean to a side to. I'm not going to say which side, but there were some calls in that game that mattered a lot. And yes, Oklahoma was 5-5. They did win and get a bowl game eligible now, so that's always good when you can get a bowl game. Another upset: Texas A&M lost to Auburn in 4 overtimes.
Yeah. That was wild to watch.
A 2-point conversion. So here's sort of how overtime works. You go into overtime and you start on the 25 going to, I believe, I always get mixed up. Is it like you go to the other end zone?
Yeah.
Like you go to your opponent's end zone, or is it going to your side of the end zone?
Your opponent's end zone.
So you go to, okay. Yes, so you go to your opponent's end zone. It's really confusing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how do you decide which is... Yeah. I don't know how they did that, why they had to make it so confusing. But anyways, you go to your opponent's end zone, you start at the 25, right? So you have 25 yards to go to get to the end zone.
Yeah.
And you have, there's no clock, there's no anything. You have 4 downs, or you can just kick a field goal, right? So most of the teams are just going to start. They're going to go, they go score a touchdown, they go kick a 1-point conversion, right? Both teams did that. Go into second overtime, and... then you start at I believe you start at the 25 again, going the same way, and you have to, when you score a touchdown, you have to go for a 2-point conversion. Which I believe, did they both get the 2-point? They both got the 2-point conversion, which moved on to third overtime. And when you get to any overtime after that, you just go for 2-point conversions.
Yeah.
You start way closer to the goal line, and you just go for 2-point conversions, whoever gets in. So Auburn had it, and Texas A&M threw the ball.
Yeah. Third overtime, they both scored it.
Right. Third overtime, they both scored it. Going to fourth, Auburn scores.
Yeah. Auburn scores, and then you see the Texas A&M quarterback snap the ball to Reed, and then he ran to his right, scrambled out of the pocket, and then saw Amari Daniels, who was the starting running back, for the Texas A&M, and you saw him just completely wide open. Take the throw right to his hands and just drop it.
Just dropped it.
And so the crowd goes wild. Auburn storms the field. And so if you catch that, that's fifth overtime, and anything can happen there. And so I know he was definitely kicking himself, super sad and super mad at himself.
So I felt so bad for him, especially because you're never going to live that one down, and really that kicks Texas A&M out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, not completely, because they still have they still have the Texas game.
Yeah.
And that's a big game. That's where game day is too. But that's a big game for them. If they win that, they'll be in the SEC championship. But still, that really ended their big hopes, and now they have a need to really, really lock in on Texas. And once again, underestimating teams.
Yeah, and so I think it was just a tough loss. Like you said, I don't know if he'll ever be able to live that down, but that could happen to anybody. Drop passes happen all the time, and so it's especially under pressure. But yeah,
I know. Yeah, that's
a tough loss.
Feel great. Indiana lost to OSU. Obviously, not surprising, but we did pick Indiana, and they did get blown out, and they looked really, really bad.
Yeah, they didn't look great. I thought they'd be more of a contender. You know what I'm saying? I thought they would just.
They sort of scored on their first drive, and then they were just gone after that.
Yeah, like you're saying, the first drive was really productive. They went, I think, 70-something yards, and they really did good. And then it all just kind of fell apart.
Yeah, it really all just kind of fell apart. Colorado lost to Kansas. This was crazy. Colorado really needed to win this. Now they're in the bottom of the Iowa State, BYU, ASU, Colorado fight for the Big 12 championship. 2 spots so there, but now they're at the bottom of that, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to gain much for that either. We said we were going to touch on this a little bit earlier. Ole Miss lost to Florida, and Billy Napier, the Florida coach, probably and hopefully doesn't get fired. He was on the hot seat earlier this year, but he has done a really, really good job.
Yeah. Like you said, just losing.
Yeah, just losing that game was, for Ole Miss, that was rough. They went out, beat Georgia, and then they lost to Florida. I mean, that really ended their thing because they're not going to be in a good spot right now because Alabama's going to be ahead of them. Alabama has more respect than Ole Miss does right now.
Definitely.
And you see that, sure, Ole Miss has an offense, but you just don't see it you're just not seeing it more than Alabama is right now.
Yeah.
Sure, Alabama really struggled, but they both let up 24 points on defense. And sure, you're losing to Florida, and one of them is losing to Oklahoma, but still, I mean, that's big because Ole Miss needed to win that game. Especially if they win that game, they go over Alabama. They have a better chance to make the playoffs, and they play Mississippi State, who has a losing record, and I really do think a win in that game would have done so good for them.
Yeah, like you said, just proving themselves against that Florida team. Sorry, I had my notes down wrong. But, yeah, just proving themselves against that Florida team, like we touched on. I think they could have done better. They could have won that game easily if their defense had just stepped up a little bit more and their offense had just thrived a little bit more. But, yeah, like you said, that was a tough loss. Hopefully, like you said, Billy Napier does not
get fired.
Yeah, does not get fired because he's done really good with the assets he has. Like you said, like we touched on last week, was it 15 or 25 guys from the transfer portal?
25, I believe.
25. So, yeah, bringing 25 guys in the transfer portal, that's big. And being able to convince 25 guys to come to your team is really crazy. And so, yeah, I think he's just really built a lot. And so, yeah, hopefully he doesn't get fired, and hopefully he can just continue to do great with the Ole Miss team.
The Florida team. He's the Florida coach.
Or, sorry, Florida.
Florida coach. Yeah. You're good. Obviously, BYU lost to Arizona State. We said that earlier. We both picked Arizona State, but it was still a ranked team lost, and Arizona State is now at the top of the Big 12, and Cam Skatiba with 3 touchdowns. He really good in that game. Army lost to Notre Dame once again. Not surprising, but a ranked team did lost. And then, not an upset, but Penn State did really struggle to Minnesota, and Boise State struggled to Wyoming. And I think that was really big. 7 ranked, like I said earlier, 7 ranked teams lost this week, and that really changed a lot. All right, and that ends our section for that, and we are now going to get into the SEC. We're going to talk about the SEC, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Big 12, and then we're going to get to our game day junior picks.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, like we touched on last week, Texas is still ahead, almost a shoe-in for that playoff spot.
Yeah, for sure.
But now you see every other team has 2 or more losses, not just in regular play, but also conferences.
Yeah, I know. That is amazing.
Yeah, and so just seeing all those losses, but then UGA has clinched.
UGA somehow clinched with Ole Miss losing, Alabama losing, and Texas A&M losing. UGA has now clinched the SEC championship.
And that was not something I expected at all.
And the funny thing is, Texas still hasn't clinched it yet. Because the Texas A&M game, whoever wins that game goes and plays Georgia.
Yeah.
And I do think a Georgia-Texas rematch would be really big. I think Texas has a lot more to prove. I think it's really hard to beat a team twice for UGA, be able to beat Texas twice. But I really do think the SEC is really hard this year. I think even though you bring in Texas, you bring in Oklahoma has struggled this year. Just have a bowl game right now. They just got a bowl game after beating Alabama.
Yeah.
They went to 6-5, and then Texas, sure, they've done good, but they were good before that too. So I really think that the SEC is really good, really good this year. And we also see that Alabama might not be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Alabama has been in the playoffs for years and years and years. And that was when there was 4 teams. Now there's 12. And if Alabama doesn't make the playoffs when there's 12 teams, that's really interesting. And then they're not even ranked inside the top 12 right now. I don't ever remember seeing Alabama. I mean, I believe we saw it earlier this year where they were ranked outside the top 12 just for a little bit though. But then they moved back in, but now they're out again. And I think Alabama, sure, they have their respect. Their respect's going to really help them. That respect is their number one, what they still need to keep for a little bit longer until they realize that the Nick Saban effect was so real and it wasn't just the players. But I do think that Alabama might not make it to the playoffs. Just seeing how the schedule will work out. Winner of the Big 12 still moves in, bumps somebody out. The ACC still has to figure out there are 3 ACC teams in front of them, so that could affect some stuff. But I really do think I think Alabama has a chance, but I don't know if they will be able to do it.
Well, and I think that's crazy, just to me at least, because you see Alabama just making that playoff or barely getting out of that playoff as long as I can remember. And so when I thought 12-team playoff, Alabama's an automatic shoe-in. They're going to get there. Even without Nick Saban, they're still going to have that good leadership. They're still going to have those good players, and they're going to get in. But I was surprised to see that Alabama might not make the playoffs. And that's the thing that's like crazy because you always see Alabama as this dominant team, but maybe, don't want to jinx them. I'm just saying maybe this could be the downfall of Alabama.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, and then just real quick, lucky Tennessee with Ole Miss and Alabama losing, that moves them a lot higher.
Yeah.
Than they think. They were in the hot spot for not the hot seat because they're not going to get fired or anything, but like the hot seat for not making the playoffs. You know what I mean? And so I really do think that really helped them, especially the Texas A&M loss, because now Texas A&M. I mean, sure, if they beat Texas, that's not helping them because then I think Texas makes the playoffs no matter what. Mm-hmm. But then again, don't be surprised if A&M make things complicated versus playing Texas, and Vandy might with another upset playing Tennessee. We've seen multiple this year beating Alabama. And so I really do think there could be some more SEC stuff happening this week.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then, Tennessee needs to win that game versus Vandy.
Really badly.
And then I think they solidify that spot in the playoffs. So,
I get that. All right, real quick, we just wanted to touch on the Big 12, sort of run through it. I think Colorado might just be gone, like I said. Bottom, ranked 25th right now, bottom of the rankings, sort of, and it's bottom of the Big 12. And I really think Colorado might be gone, even though Travis Hunter can still be in the Heisman running. It doesn't really matter where your team ranks. He can always be in the Heisman running. Good luck to him. And I do think Colorado might just be the end of their year. Sure, they still have 3 losses, and people like South Carolina are ranked ahead of them, but I really do think that their losses just haven't proved much. And then Iowa State is back for round 2. They were sort of at the top at the beginning of the year, and they fell back, and now they're coming back. We're all tied up in the Big 12.
Yeah.
With Iowa State, ASU, and BYU. ASU beat BYU, so they should be going to the Big 12 championship. But then it's between Iowa State and BYU. And I think BYU has the better wins, right? I believe, and I think they are ahead of them. So it really could be a BYU and ASU matchup again. Yeah. Arizona State versus BYU, which would be a ton of fun again to see that. Mm-hmm. I think that Arizona State and BYU, that'd be a fun one. I think BYU would come back for more. Like we said earlier, sort of mentioning the Georgia and Texas game, is that they can't – it's hard to beat a team twice.
Yeah.
Right?
I think I think it's easy, especially if you're like, oh, well, we beat this team once, we can beat them again. I am a firm believer, and while maybe there are odds and maybe there are, oh, yeah, this team is way better than this team, I firmly believe in that any team can beat any other team on any given day.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so I think never underestimate your competitor.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then the last thing for the Big 12 would be everyone sort of hates Kansas right now. Kansas beating Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado all back-to-back-to-back, which is really big for them, especially with the losing record they had. And so I really do think that people are really not frustrated, but like it's sort of frustrating when you lose to a team like Kansas, especially Kansas being 3 ranked teams back-to-back-to-back.
Yeah.
And so I really do think, I don't think Kansas has a chance to do anything, but I do think that that's a really thing, and people might be a little frustrated with Kansas right now. And, I mean, especially the fans. Fans are like, come on, dude, like, why you got to beat our team like that? Not that they get a choice or anything, but, like, still, it's frustrating.
Yeah, and definitely, like, Kansas, as it stands right now, is not even bowl game eligible. Yeah. They're a 5-6 team, and so it's just crazy to see, like, everybody hates Kansas because they just beat, like, all the teams. And so I think, it's just Kansas going in and beating all of them has just kind of just messed up things and just shuffled things around from what everybody originally thought would happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, that was up for the Big 12, and we're going to go into our very last section and a fun one, Game Day Junior Picks.
Game Day Junior Picks. So I, personally, went 5 for 5. You went
4 and 6.
So I had the upper hand on you in that Louisville versus Pitt game. Louisville did win.
I trusted Army a little bit too much there. I thought they'd do better. I also trusted Indiana a lot more, but I'm always like an upset, and you've seen a lot of upsets this year, so that's why I'm sort of pulling for upsets, and you might see 1 or 2 me picking an upset today.
Okay, so our first pick is Tennessee versus Vanderbilt. Me personally, I choose Tennessee. I know Vanderbilt has made some crazy upsets, and it's just been fun to watch them, but I think Tennessee is just going to really drive because they know they need to win this game.
Yeah,
this isn't a game they're going to underestimate at all. They know Vanderbilt has the potential to do crazy stuff to good teams, and so I think Tennessee is really just going to focus, be determined, drive, and just make sure they can make that playoff spot.
Yeah, I got to go with the Vols here. Not much to say about it. Sort of what you said, I sort of agree with that. Auburn, Alabama.
So, Auburn, little context, just what we've already talked about before.
Yeah.
Coming off that win, but I do think Alabama wins it. I think they just need to prove themselves again, right? To have any chance at the playoffs, and so they just need to win that game versus Auburn. I think Auburn has had a really good defense, but I think Alabama is just going to be able to get that, as you talked about earlier, get that touchdown streak rolling again.
Yeah, I agree with that. Alabama and Auburn, I mean, it was just, we've seen it in the past. It's a rivalry game. It's rivalry week. Anything can happen. We saw Alabama throw a touchdown in the back corner of the end zone for a Hail Mary to Isaiah Bond.
Yeah.
to win the game, and that was shocking for so many people. But that was a big game.
Next up is Notre Dame versus USC. Me personally, I have Notre Dame winning by a long shot.
Me too.
I don't think USC has really been a contender versus many good teams this year.
Yeah.
And so I see Notre Dame coming out on top.
Yeah, USC contender at the beginning of the year, but Notre Dame's going to take this one.
Definitely.
All right, a big rivalry game, especially for us, being a Georgia fan for me and a Georgia Tech fan for Andrew. Georgia Tech, Friday at 7:30.
Yeah. Here's my stance on it. Okay, Georgia Tech. Okay, here's my stance on it. I know Georgia knows they need to win this game, but they clinched SEC championship game. So, what happens if Georgia Tech goes out and beats the Georgia game? Because they underestimate them, because Georgia Tech is a scrappy team. I didn't see 100% out of Georgia Tech last week. Kind of struggled a little bit, especially because of that Haynes King injury. But I think the backup just really came out and just really thrived again. So I think Georgia Tech definitely has a shot. I'm going to pick them. I know you've picked Georgia.
Yeah.
And we might be a little biased, but I think Georgia Tech definitely has a chance. Don't count out Georgia Tech. They have a chance. You can admit that.
Yeah.
They definitely have a chance. But
Georgia wins by 30.
I do see Georgia winning, but I'm going to hold out hope.
All right, Kentucky-Louisville. This has been a big game. In the past, we've seen Louisville and Kentucky both do good. I got to go SEC strong here. I think Kentucky beats Louisville just because the SEC is too good, and Kentucky's put up some fights this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think Kentucky's put up some fights. Even though I picked Louisville last week, I'm going to stray away from that. Pick Kentucky. Kentucky's put up some good fights, so I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Next up is Kansas State versus Iowa State, and I think we actually disagree here. I think Iowa State has something to prove. I think they're going to go out and beat Kansas State. I know that Kansas State definitely has a chance, definitely has a shot. They've proven themselves against some all right teams. I think their odds are like 50 and 40, something like that. But I think Iowa State's going to pull it off.
Yeah, I gotta go with Kansas State. Kansas State's had a pretty good year. They're now ranked in the top 25, number 24. And I think Kansas State will be able to pull out a win on Iowa State.
Yeah, we'll just have to see. That's going to be an exciting game. Next up, we have Oregon versus Washington.
Yeah, obviously we both picked Oregon for this one.
Do we need to say less? Oregon.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Miami versus Syracuse.
I think this is a big game because Syracuse has a winning record and they can pull up a win with Miami, but I think Miami's offense is too strong. Cam Ward and the Hurricanes get the win.
Yeah, I'm actually praying in the downfall of Cam Ward and the Miami offense.
Dang.
For them to have an off day and to see the Syracuse Orange pull it off.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So we'll see.
South Carolina and Clemson, two ranked teams, number 12 and number 15 going at it.
And I'm glad you actually agree with me here. We both chose South Carolina. Just because I think their offense has been really strong. I think just seeing people like Rocket Sanders at the running back, I think he's really going to push through that Clemson defense. And I'm just excited to see what's going to happen. I think that's going to be a close game. Definitely no margin winning. I think it's going to be really close. And it's a really fun rivalry game to watch.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the SEC is just strong throughout the whole thing, and especially with South Carolina being 15, I think I have to give this one to Clemson. I mean, to South Carolina. My apologies. South Carolina beats Clemson.
Yeah.
But in a close game.
Last one, Texas versus Texas A&M.
Yes, this is where game day is, and they are at the 12th man. So I have to go with Texas A&M. Coming off a rough week this week, they know that their only hope of making the playoffs, Texas can still make the playoffs. They're not going to be big.
Yeah.
But in the 12th man, this is a very hard place to play. The 12th man, they call it the 12th man because of the fans. They call them the 12th man on the field. And it's just so loud there. And I think it's so hard.
Me personally, I still have Texas. I think Texas A&M is going to be a little sad coming off that loss. We'll just have to see. I think Texas is overall just a lot stronger than Texas A&M, but I definitely think they could pull off an upset.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, we thank you all for joining us on our short little mini episode. We just felt like we needed to address the different comebacks, the different things, and the different just rankings now that we have. But we'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.